Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project. My name is Chris Akers, and on this podcast, we talk about art, culture, politics, and sport, and anything else we can think of. Now, today's guest is an absolute pleasure to actually speak to him because we've interacted quite a lot on Twitter as well. His name's Phil Quinlan, and can you please introduce yourself, Phil?
Thanks a million, Chris. Really appreciate the invite this afternoon. I'm Phil Quinlan. I'm almost 50 years of age, and 33 years ago, I suffered an awful brain injury on the football pitch as a 15-year-old, just an innocuous clash of heads that changed my life.
Yeah, indeed. And you've written it in this book here, which is And a Bang on the Ear, which I've read, and it's an excellent book. So I'd highly recommend it to anyone. But we're going to ask questions about this book, and then we're going to go to like the wider themes as well. So first of all, can you just take us, before we go back to the day where the actual innocuous clash of heads happened, just go back to the type of person you were, because in the book you describe yourself as an athlete who wanted to represent Ireland in various sports. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, as a teenager, I was probably one of the fittest guys in my county. I ran cross country for me twice, under 12 and under 14 level. And back in those days, you ran everywhere, you timed yourself against everything. And you just wanted to be the fittest, the best, the fastest, the strongest 15-year-old you could be. So I made up my own homemade triathlons just to test myself against myself. And played a bit of Gaelic, a lot of rugby, and then played soccer for, I think it was 2 months. And that was the end of my sporting career,
Yeah, so let's go back to that day where the incident occurred. Just take us back to it. So it was a football match, a soccer match for those watching in the States, and it was it under 15s, if I'm correct, as well?
I was 15, it was under 16s.
Under 16s.
And it was a terribly foggy day, which probably didn't help matters in the long run. But we had to get a bus out to there's a gate just out the road, and you got changed there. You walked across 2 fields to get to the pitch, and it was very hard to see. You could sort of make out sort of friends on the sideline, the far sideline, but the fog came down very, very quickly, and then it was just a lottery of a match. You didn't know where the ball was going to end up. I suppose you just heard lots of talking, lots of screaming, lots of shouting, but you could see nothing. It was like all sound and no picture, if you like. Yeah. And about half an hour into the game, the ball came towards me, head height. I went to head the ball, and the centre half on the other team clashed heads with me. I got back up. I answered the questions that the ref gave to me, the Maddox questions. Where are you? What's the score? Who are you playing against? I answered them all perfectly correctly, and then played on. But I suppose a few minutes later, I started to feel a bit groggy. I got double vision. I started hallucinating. It was obvious then I was concussed, but 33 years ago, I'm not even sure if concussion was invented. So I was taken off a few minutes before halftime and told to go sleep in the dugout. So these days, that's a huge red flag. But back then, I suppose I was always the chatty sort of a guy, so they probably just wanted me to fall asleep to save myself from myself. So I suppose I was in the dugout for about 15 minutes, and there was no questions being asked until the trickle of blood started to come from my ear. And then panic stations started. The manager called on the bus driver to get the bus ready. I was carried across a couple of fields then. As I approached the edge of the pitch, there was an electric fence surrounding the pitch, because that's where the sheep used to be kept in. And my arm was left dragging along I was carried, and my arm was left dangling down, and one of the players started screaming to lift my arm up in case I got electrocuted. which I'm not sure now whether that would have been a good or a bad thing. It could have jolted me back into life, who knows.
Mhm.
So we finally got to the bus, and because it was the fog had come down an awful lot since the kickoff, the bus driver was, his biggest challenge was trying to overtake cars, which was impossible on the small road because of the fog. And he was getting very agitated. He kept screaming back to keep me awake, don't let me fall asleep. And I just wanted to go back asleep because there's more comfort in sleep than being awake. And I was trying to fight the fatigue. So we got to Our Lady's Hospital in Navan, which should have been a 10-minute journey. It was a 40-minute journey. And I was in and out of consciousness then. I think I had talk and die syndrome, where I was talking sense, but in the background, the damage was being done in my head. The blood clot was continuing to grow. And finally, a nurse arrived to man the ambulance. It was a mad George then, blue light all the way to Dublin. And as I arrived in the brain injury hospital in Dublin, I arrested. And thankfully, there was a research team around me to jolt me back to life. And once the CAT scan was done, that showed a huge and ever-growing blood clot. So into surgery then for 2 hours. And I met the neurosurgeon a couple of years ago. He said it was an easy and simple operation, which I had to laugh at, but it was a vital operation. And time was just not my friend that day. So after the blood clot was evacuated, I was in a coma for 10 days. And then over the period of about 6 weeks, I very, very gradually woke up like a dripping tap. I realized what was happening, what was going on, and also that I'd lost my ability to walk, talk, and eat. So that was the first 2 months in Beaumont Hospital, realizing that I couldn't do any of these things anymore, that a mad 15-year-old wanted to do. So the surgeons kept coming in, and I just kept hearing 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. And they didn't talk to me at all. They just spoke to Mom. And in my own head, I just heard the 2 years, and I thought, right, I'm 16. In 2 years' time, I'll be 18. Wow, it's a bit of a rest break, if you like. So in 2 years' time, I'll be able to run the Dublin Marathon. But what I didn't hear was, I suppose in brackets, the surgeons were saying 2 years, and then we'll reassess. So that meant nothing to me. In my innocence of being 16, I suppose I just thought this was going to be a 2-year sabbatical, if you like. And it was, I suppose it took me about 20, maybe 30 years to come to the realization that I was never going to run that Dublin Marathon. But being so young and so naivety of youth, I'd imagine, I think that's what kept me going for the 20, 30 years afterwards. The slim, small sliver of a chance that, okay, one day I'll be able to be cured and I'll be able to run that Dublin Marathon. I'll be able to be back on the pitch playing football. I realize now that was a dream, a fantasy, a wish. It's probably still a wish, but every year the percentage of hope I have gets lesser and lesser. So that was the first 2 months. And then I had to wait at home for a month before a bed became available in the Rehabilitation Institute in Dunleary, where a lot of people with brain injuries from car crashes, from accidents, from everything, go to get rehab. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I was lucky 33 years ago that it only took a month before a bed became available, because I believe they're much more sought after these days. There's a lot more people waiting to get in nowadays than there was over a quarter of a century ago. So the rehab in Dunleary was immense. Everything was tailored around sport. So I dived into this, and there's a massive sports hall. I suppose every day or everywhere these days has these sports halls, but back then this was brilliant to be around. There was basketball nets, there was pool, there was snooker, there was football, there was every competition under the sun, in an effort to get these people like myself out of wheelchairs and back walking, back struggling, back as fit as they could get me in the 3 months I'd spent there. So I love the camaraderie of the place. I was probably one of the youngest in the rehab in Dunleary. So I gravitated towards the older men who had experience of life and listened to their stories about what had happened to them. And I considered myself better off because I was so young, getting injured. I had that time to adapt, that naivety to adapt, and just to get on with life. And to my dreams were all ahead of me then. I suppose that the biggest dream I had was to travel. That turned into my drug of choice because I suppose I looked drunk, and I couldn't take a chance of, I suppose, drinking alcohol at the time because I didn't know what way it'd lead me. So my drug of choice was travel. And I traveled all over the world, every place I wanted to as a child. I'd grown up in Zambia, in deepest, darkest Africa, back in 1977 to 81. And I remember that fondly. So in 2004, I walked back into the time machine that brought me back to my hometown of Kitwe. And I visited the school, the rugby club, the town, my old house where I grew up in, which was just, it was amazing to walk down or to wobble back in time. And met my first ever best friend who's still living there. And he brought me around all the town. And it was just amazing to see how my memories had grown up with me and how I remembered so much about the 4 years, being 3 till I was 7 there. And it was just, it was just, I suppose, heartwarming to walk down memory lane, if you like, Chris, you know.
Yeah, indeed. Before we get to the whole rehabilitation and what have your head injury, one of the most interesting aspects of the book that you've just mentioned there is obviously born in Ireland, but you grew up in Zambia. How did that come about that you ended up being in Zambia? And also, what was that experience like of growing up in Africa?
Oh, well, Dad got a job as an engineer in the copper mines. Back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, Zambia was huge for copper. And I suppose that the mineral was very sought after all over the world for telecommunications. So that's what brought us over there. It was a fantastic place to grow up because everything was outside. There was trees to climb, there was races to run, Dad was exploring the mines, I was exploring the town, the streets around us, climbing up trees, mango trees, banana trees. That's where it was all at. Swimming was fantastic. I was introduced to swimming as a 3 or 4 year old and taught myself how to swim in the blistering African sun. As I think every young child, if they have an opportunity, will relish growing up abroad somewhere. Because it was Zambia, I grew up, I was probably one of only 3 or 4 white people in my class. I grew to love being abroad and being around foreigners, despite me being the foreigner.
Yeah.
You know, it was, I suppose that gave me the respect of different people. You know, it was an uplifting experience to grow up there, and I can't thank my parents enough for bringing me over there, because I was probably one of the best swimmers in my class, and I remember fondly there was a little girl in my class when I was 7. I asked her, would she miss me when we were leaving Zambia? And she said, absolutely not. I thought, well, at least lie and tell me, you know. I said, why won't you miss me? Because now I'll be the best swimmer in my class.
Okay.
So that was it. And then to go back in 2004 to walk down the memory lane and to meet my old best friend, and it was fascinating. Like, I'd love to bring my 8-year-old over there now and let him, maybe he'd climb the mango tree out the back garden. That was my everything back then. That was teaching myself how to climb and teach myself, you know, coordination. I think a lot of the reason I probably turned out so well after the injury was because I put the prehab in. And speak of the devil, Here's my 8-year-old.
Hello.
Hi.
Say hi.
Hello.
This is Joe. He's a mad sportsman, very
Hi,
keen.
okay.
He plays with Parkville, the team I played with 33 years ago.
Oh,
A
okay.
bit of a goal scorer. So, and oh, here's my favorite daughter.
Hi.
She's another keen sports fanatic. So that's it. Sorry for that.
No, it's all right. It was a nice moment. Very nice moment. One of the things I was going to talk to you about as well, again, before we get to rehabilitation, it obviously happened at the football match, and there's a lot of talk about traumatic brain injury, TBI now, and whatnot, and heading of the ball of youngsters and so on and so forth, and other restrictions at certain ages in other sports. What were the safety protocols for like under 16 matches then that the referee had to adhere to, or was there any?
I don't honestly think there was any. I think he was probably a bit out of the station by asking me the questions. I remember answering them correctly, but I don't think there was any sort of protocols back then whatsoever, which is sad. But it's great to see them these days. It's great to see that rugby level now that they have the HIA. I'm not sure if soccer will ever bring it in. It should do. But at amateur level, there shouldn't be any sort of HIA because nobody on the sideline is equipped or qualified to do that HIA. Like if in doubt after a head injury, get off the pitch straight away, you know, and be monitored then, and later on, if necessary, to hospital and assessed. But it's just, I'm delighted the way education has come along, but it still has a long way to go.
Yeah, indeed. Obviously, for those who don't know, HIA is obviously head injury assessment. That's cool. And you talked today about obviously getting into the bus and then going to the hospital. Then obviously you had the coma and the rehabilitation. What was that rehabilitation phase like? And has it changed from that you know of from like what they do now?
Well, I don't think it's changed that much. It was all like every injury is different. Every brain injury is different. So, but there's some similar scenarios. Like my right side was totally paralyzed. So I had to go into Dún Laoghaire, the rehabilitation, and the physios had me there for twice a day for 2 hours at a go, just solely working on my mainly my right leg, but my right arm as well, because I had to get back to school. So learning how to write again. I knew how to write, but my hand was so weak, I couldn't hold a pen straight. So they were working. It was very regularly on both my right leg and my right arm. Cognitively, I think I wasn't left as bad as a lot of people could be, but physically, I just had to concentrate solely on my right leg and my right arm to get back in. So it was a lot of walking, a lot of between the parallel bars, and initially, and then with my right arm, it was just basically right. There was no such thing as iPads back then or computers that you could bring around the place. So it had to be back to pencil and pen. And it was a lot of rehab that way. I presume it's very similar these days now for victims of head injury like stroke survivors. They go through an awful lot of the same stuff. Maybe it's better these days. Maybe it's more acute these days. Thankfully, I've not had to go back in for a while, but hopefully, like medicine changes every day. It improves every day, and the progress is immense. So I'd imagine the protocols these days are an awful lot better in rehabs for brain injury victims.
Okay. And how long was that phase of rehabilitation for? Just remind me.
Yeah, well, I was in Beaumont Hospital in the brain hospital for 3.5 months, and then in the Rehabilitation Institute in Dún Laoghaire for another 3 months. And then you're left on your own basically. There's once every 6 months for 2 years you might get a checkup, but basically it was all down to me and mum and dad. So go back to school the following September was huge. It was probably the best form of physio I had, getting up every 40 minutes from a class to walk to the far end of the school and negotiate the jungle that was the boys trying to bully me and push me over and slag me off and all that. Looking back now, it was great physio in itself, and it was great to get back to school. It was hard, but I had a good cohort of friends who ended up being bodyguards to help me walk the corridors and sort out the bullies for me. But I likened that stage to being probably the best rehab I could have done at the time.
Yeah. And then, so you had the rehab. Obviously, your mum and dad are looking after you. Was there any help from the state you could have received at that point, or your mum and dad could receive, like, say, a carer's allowance?
At the time, no. Dad was working, so he was the earner. Mum was at home. Back then, you could afford, well, we could probably afford to have mum at home as the homemaker, the mother, the everything that we needed, you know, because she had 3 other kids apart from myself to look after. Dad was working. It was a lower cost of living back then, so we didn't have an awful lot, but what we had, it would have been necessary, like food and shelter and fresh clothes every day. But it was it was it was a great upbringing, you know. There was no help. I'm not sure if the state was ever involved. I think because I was at school, there was no need for carers allowance back then. I'm not even sure if they went for an assessment. I honestly don't know. But these days, there's a lot of carers allowances there, but I think they're means tested. I've never had to look for one, thankfully. So because everything I've worked for, I've sort of earned, you know.
Yeah, indeed. So mum and dad look after you, and then you decide after a while that you're going to start going traveling around the world. And correct me if I'm wrong, weren't you a volunteer at the Summer Olympics in Sydney 2000? Look at that right.
No, I was a paid employee at the Summer Olympics. Yeah.
Okay.
It was always a dream for me to run at the Olympics, but that was not going to happen after 16. So I ended up in Australia in '99. There was an Irish international rules team playing against the Aussies, a mixture of Irish Gaelic football and Aussie rules.
Mhm.
And I reported for the local Meath Chronicle newspaper at the time. And as time went on, I found jobs. I could only work in Australia for 3 months at a time, and then you had to move jobs. That was the visa restrictions. So that suited me perfectly. And the jobs I got were brilliant, but the real one I wanted was the summer games. And I applied initially and thought there's no chance. I'd volunteer if necessary, no problem. And I went for the interview. I was shocked to get called for the interview alongside a college lecturer and a corporate banker. And I answered all the questions very well. Then a month later, I think I got the confirmation letter saying I'd been selected to be a manager of central operations at the games. So that I was blown away by that. And the games it was fantastic to be part of. I looked after the volunteers so well. I was given meal tickets to hand out. I was given watches to hand out. Everything the volunteers wanted and needed, they got. Because there was no skin off my nose to hand out everything they needed. It was just a fascinating time to be in Australia. It was so busy. I managed central operations very well. I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but very well. I think it was just an incredible games to be at, and I saw an old neighbour of mine throwing the javelin. I got tickets to see that, and then to see Sonia O'Sullivan win silver was like an ambition for years. So it was great to be a part of all that, even though I had to sneak in to see her win the silver medal. But just an incredible journey in Australia. It's a fantastic country, and that taught me that the mentality of the Australians suited me perfectly. Their chauvinistic outlook on disabilities was just incredible. They slag you off no matter what way you walk, talk, or look. And I gravitated towards that. Like, I walked into a bar in Alice Springs, and this old cowboy sat in the bar, was eyeing me up. And he said, "What happened to your leg?" And I said, "I got injured playing football." "Aussie rules or rugby league?" he queried. And I shouted back, "Soccer." "Serves you bloody right." So, what are you drinking? It's just in your face. And once that's over with, they drink with you, they chat with you. It's like, it's not a problem for anybody else. But I found traveling in Ireland and England is totally different.
Yeah.
Because the don't stare mentality. Don't stare, and the kids are staring. They should be invited over rather than their parents pushing them out of the way. "No, don't stare. Come on, quick, get out of the way. Get out of the way. Let's go. Let's go." Well, I found that in Britain and in Ireland, it's very different. So it makes having a disability a wee bit harder, but a bit more challenging to sort of ice break, if you like.
Yeah. I was going to say, from what you're saying about the Australian experience, that chauvinism, looked ahead over it, it kind of normalized the situation for you. So, okay, you have a disability, but so what? You go carry on doing what you're doing. Whereas I hear what you're saying with regards to this, oh, don't stare. I think it's a little bit better now, certainly in the UK. But yeah, there's still this don't stare attitude towards it. Whereas I think you say with Australia, there seems to be like a normality. They'll ask you questions, and then once asked questions, okay, then fine, and then on their way.
Well, even in Eastern Europe, when I traveled there and in the States, the first question they ask is, "What happened to your leg?" And it's sometimes I say absolutely nothing because it was a brain injury. Nothing happened to my leg. It was a brain injury. But once I say football injury, that's it. Okay, change the subject. Tell me something, Do you know Bono? Do you drink Guinness? All that, the typical Irish questions. But no, I think it's all on a lot of it is on the person with the disability and how they react. Now, I suppose maybe these days I'm happy with my journey to be able to slag myself off. Self-deprecation is huge with me. And the slagging I get even from my kids is heartwarming. They see myself being joking with the black humor I use, and they get in on it as well. Like my daughter is a huge fan of Ireland's Fitted Family on television, very famous TV show. And the 8-year-old said last year, "Oh, we'd never be able to go on that." "Why?" says my wife. "Because Daddy'd be slowing us down." So it's that sort of humor, just you laugh at that.
Yeah.
But I suppose it does depend how happy you are with your journey and what stage you are on your journey. But I feel if I'm okay at being slagged off, it makes it easier for others to, maybe it's a sense of relief, maybe. They think, "Oh, okay, if he can be funny with himself, we're allowed." And, I'm not sure if that was always the way, but I think in the early days, I was very, very full of self-pity. And it was harder then to accept being slagged off, even by people that just meant it as the slagging off. It didn't mean any harm, but I took it to heart. But I suppose it was a conscious decision maybe about 10 years ago to tell people I'm okay, I'm not in pain. People don't want to hear you're in pain. They don't want to hear moans or complaints or anything like that. So I keep that to myself, and I just tell people I'm living the dream, because I suppose that if you're moaning and groaning, people gravitate away from you, and I don't want to alienate people at all. So I manage the pain an awful lot better these days, which helps.
It sounds like just taking the mick, it just, like I said earlier, it just gave you that normality. Whereas I feel with the UK and Ireland, obviously, disability rights is important, and we'll get to that later in the interview. But it's almost like, I don't know if it can overshadow sometimes, a bit like you almost see the disability as opposed to the person, if you understand what I mean. So, for example, if you see, I don't know, someone in a wheelchair, like from what you're saying in Australia, they'll just see a person and ask a question, oh, why are you in a wheelchair? And then now once that's over and done with, oh, okay, you're this person now, then so we can take the mick and you can take the mick of us back and so on and so forth. Whereas from what you're saying with UK and Ireland, there seems to be a bit more focus on the wheelchair, so to speak. Would that be an accurate way of describing it?
There is, but it's amazing the way people from Ireland and Great Britain see the wheelchair first and are more accepting of the wheelchair or an aid or a Zimmer frame, because that makes it easier for them to ask, do you need help? Whereas when they see me walking along, it's like cerebral palsy, I'm dragging my leg along and it looks like I'm drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of stay away from me in case they catch the disability off me.
Mm.
But when you're using an aid, it's much more easier for them it appeals more because they can see something and they see, okay, this person needs help. But it's much easier for me to use the power chair, but I just don't want to become reliant on it just yet, you know. Like I use a fantastic contraption now. It's an e-foldy. I think it's manufactured in Britain,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been made an ambassador there just last week. And it's a great way for me to manage the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Superb way, because I don't have to put my 90% of concentration into staying up anymore. I can motivate this e-foldy chair so much easier, and I can look up and face people rather than looking down at the ground and like a radar searching for obstacles when I'm walking that could trip me up. So it's a shame that you need an aid for other people to be comfortable with your disability.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's just a way to blend in, if you like, or maybe it's a way to ease into the conversation and make it easier for them. Unfortunately, that's the way I think it works.
Yeah,
you know.
very much so. Going back to your traveling, obviously you grew up abroad and you had the zest to go abroad as well. After all what happened to you, what kept that zest of traveling within you? Because I can imagine some people, regardless of what situation they're in, if it's been very life-changing, there might be some will embrace it and say, okay, this has happened, I've only got one life, we'll need to do what we need to do. But some might actually withdraw from that out of a fear or out of a risk. So what was it about you with regards to traveling? Like, why did you want to continue to travel after everything that happened to you?
Well, I think, Chris, it was because I was brought up in Zambia.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed that so much as a child. Maybe it was a subconscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen, I'd always been fond of travel programs, and I wanted to go here, there, and everywhere. But I suppose it was also, I suppose for the first few years after my injury, Mum and Dad wrapped me in cotton wool. And the best way to escape this cotton wool syndrome was to travel. And maybe it was sort of a prove to myself that I could do it. None of my peers were doing this. They were buying houses, buying cars, getting married, having their drinking sessions when I was learning to walk again.
Mm-hmm.
So this was, and I suppose nobody knew me abroad. And I needed this outlet to grow and to nurture and to find myself, really. You know, that's probably the reason I travel so much, to escape the cotton wool that I was wrapped in by Mum and Dad. Obviously, they were going to do it, and I'll never thank them enough for doing it. But I think I had to grow up and become a bit more independent. And that's what certainly travel did for me.
And while you're traveling, you were helping out on particular camps, is that correct, from what I remember in the book?
I first worked for L'Arche, just north of Paris. I went over to practice my French for my leaving certificate the following year. And I enjoyed that for the week that I was there, but it turned a bit sour They wanted me to do a different job and hide me away in warehouses folding leaflets. So I thumbed out and escaped to Paris and spent a few days in Paris just in awe of the place. I'd only ever seen it on television, the end of the Tour de France stages. And it was fascinating to be there, to be able to traverse the streets and the boulevards with my big heavy suitcase, and just it was magical to be there. And then after that, I was home. I was working on and off for a while, and then Camp Mary Hart in New Jersey came calling, and that was an uplifting experience to be working with kids and adults with severe disabilities, because 7 years previously I was so reliant and dependent on nurses and mom and dad for everything, from being fed to being showered to wipe my bum. Suddenly I had to do all this for these strangers. I was their everything. I was their entertainer, their confessor, their mother, their father, everything. And this was so empowering after being sort of locked up myself and being tended to for the first few years after injury. So I learned an awful lot about myself, what I was willing to do, what I was able to do, and my disability didn't affect me there whatsoever. And after that, then I suppose I parked working with disabled people for years until I suppose about 17, 18 years ago, I did a course, special needs assistant course, and then just out of for a hobby, I wanted to get back in the study. So I was working in computers, and I just did this as a hobby, but got in touch with an old teacher of mine who was principal later on in my primary school. And she suggested I go and tout myself out to a special school. And I was offered a job there. I'm now working 16, 17 years later with kids with severe and profound difficulties. And it's an amazing experience, because maybe I'm drawn to them because I know I have a certain amount of knowledge what they're going through, and maybe more so what their parents are going through, because they are the real heroes, the parents. Because having a child with a disability is huge. I'm not sure what it's like in Britain, but in Ireland, the taboo is still there to a certain extent. It's getting better slowly, but it's getting better. And the services, the assessments, everything, it's still a fight, which it shouldn't be a fight.
Mhm.
So I can give them some sort of insight into what their kid is going through. I can sit with their child for hours a day and make them smile, make them laugh. Hopefully, with the aid of a teacher, help them learn little things, tolerate certain things like getting their teeth brushed, feeding, clothing, all that sort of stuff. So it's been a great journey so far.
Yeah, indeed. You talked a little bit about attitudes as well. When we've talked a little bit about attitudes of disabled people, there's a section in the book which I found really interesting where you talked about disability rights in Ireland and the UK. Can you just go a bit more into that, and also how they developed? Well, obviously, you probably know a bit more about Ireland maybe than the UK, but how they developed since you had your injury, and whether you think they could be developed further.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario in Ireland. A lot of benefits are means tested,
Mhm.
which I don't think they should be. I think at the start, when you have a child with a disability, you should get everything you need, and for as long as you need it.
Mhm.
But it's all means tested. It's the assessments left, right, and center. And then when the kids start school, there's therapy that should be in place regularly, which I don't think is strong enough yet. And like there's the new schemes put in place where therapists are moved around different jobs, different clients, different children. And I think when this movement is so common, the child has to start again, and the parent has to start again with a new therapist every time.
Mhm.
And I just feel if it could be an awful lot better in Ireland. Not that money should be thrown at it, but a bit more money. It should be funded much better,
Mhm.
because it's a tough enough job having a kid with a disability, and then to have to fight for everything, like simple things with nappies should be a given right if needed, rather than having to fight for wheelchairs, for pods, for chairs, for everything that should be available from the get-go. Like if you're some children are measured up for wheelchairs, and by the time they get them, they've already grown out of them,
Yeah.
which, I feel it could be an awful lot better. But
Okay.
I'm not sure how that goes on in other countries, whether we're ahead of the game or behind the game. To me, I think we're just a bit behind the game, in my opinion.
Okay. So, in regards, in terms of society's attitudes in society, I know you briefly mentioned it, but how has that evolved in the sense of, and I'll give you an example. Say you like a car park where to go to a supermarket, do you still get people parking in disabled bays, for instance? Are there incidents like that where things that are reserved for disabled people are actually being taken advantage of?
Yeah, I see it every day, Chris.
Mm.
Whether fully able-bodied people think disabled people are just lazy, and them car parks are just there. People stop them. I'll just be a minute. Yeah, well, so will I. People are just ignorant. Um, I haven't seen as much on my travels, but then again, I wasn't driving as much on my travels. But in Ireland, I feel people are they're uneducated. It's just, some of them just don't give a damn. I'm going to park here. I'm paying my road tax. I should be able to park where I want. Um, it's a valid parking space, but it's it's sad that society these days thinks that it's okay to park in a disabled spot when they don't need one. Um, like I've even been bollocked for parking in a disabled spot. I got out of the car one day after a long drive, and I was doing my stretches beside the car, and this guy came up to me and says, "You don't need that spot." And I said, "Excuse me, you're not disabled." And I said, "Well, I realize that, it's probably, you probably not come across a guy as good looking as me that is disabled, but it's a fact."
Yeah.
And then he he wasn't expecting that answer, so he go back to his car, and he was watching me. He was staring at me. He was scoping me out. And as I got the confidence to walk to the shop just a couple of feet away, he screamed out, "Where's your wheelchair?" So it's attitudes like that. But I feel I feel that generation are lost.
Mhm.
I think that the generation that we should concentrate on educating is kids, primary school kids. And if we teach the kids to embarrass their parents if they park in a disabled spot just for a second, that might make the parents think a bit better.
Mm.
Because it's it needs some sort of a shock, because the authorities, they can fine them when they want. They ask people not to park in disabled bays. I'm not even sure if it's illegal. It's certainly immoral, but I'm not even sure if it's illegal to park in a disabled spot. There's fines and all, so maybe it is, but it's a tough one. But I think education of the kids would make attitudes so much better.
Is there like a blue badge scheme in Ireland, like similar to what we have in the UK in regards to that? And
Yeah,
obviously, and people still complain, even like with displaying a blue badge.
yeah, that's it. But the blue badge has a wheelchair on it.
Yeah.
So people think if you don't have a wheelchair, you shouldn't have the right to park there.
Mhm.
Now, again, they're taking bits and pieces from what they want, what they like, what suits them better than what suits the person with disability. But I think slowly we're going to get there. Slowly we're going to get there.
Okay. So we've talked about disability rights and whatnot. With regards to traumatic brain injury, TBI, how has the conversation developed? And what I mean by that is, yes, there's a lot in the news about sport and say heading the ball, like kids of a certain age shouldn't head the ball. Rugby, there's certain manoeuvres there shouldn't be taught until later on. But in terms of there's a difference between talking about it in the news and actually things being in action. And I'm just wondering, have things have actually been in action, and what's the attitude both of the sports themselves and sometimes the players, because the players will want to carry on, and naturally they would want to carry on regardless of an injury. So in effect, how has that conversation around sports and TBI changed over the years?
Well, I think one of the games that is most proactive is rugby. They seem willing to change a little bit. I haven't seen any change whatsoever in soccer. And that saddens me, because I know rugby is a lot more physical and it can be like a car crash, but I don't see why soccer shouldn't practice what they preach. They preach player welfare, player welfare, player welfare, and yet it doesn't seem like they're bothered whatsoever. You saw in the FIFA World Cup there a lot of head injuries and players just playing on, and I'm not even sure if the doctors are empowered enough. If they're independent doctors, like at the rugby at the highest level, they might make a difference. But if your club or your team doctor is involved, they have a sort of a vested interest to keep the best players on, rather than player welfare. Like there was a game back in 2013, Ireland played the All Blacks, and one of our best players was concussed and wanted to go back on, but the team doctor at the time, Éanna Falvey, grabbed him by the collar and kept him off. Now I think we lost that game, but that player, he didn't suffer anything from that. But if he had gone on like Ben Robinson and played again, got second concussion syndrome, anything could have happened. But I just think it's sad the way FIFA and UEFA haven't taken this seriously. I'm not sure what they're waiting for, whether they think it's necessary to take any precautions. I don't know. But I'd love to meet a couple of the top men involved. I'd love to meet Jose Mourinho after his outburst with Chelsea years ago, when he bollocked the team doctor who wanted to take a player off. And I don't think that team doctor is involved anymore, sadly, for standing up for the rights of the player's welfare, you know. But I don't know why soccer, like rugby is slowly improving, but soccer seems to be dragging its heels, sadly.
You talked about that rugby match between Ireland and All Blacks with the doctor. What was the reaction of the public at large when that doctor took the player off? Was there a case, especially after they lost, was there a case of, oh, they did a good job, or was there a case of, well, if the doctor hadn't interfered, we might have won the game?
Well, I suppose we'd never beaten the All Blacks.
Yeah.
And up until recently, we hadn't. I think 2018 in Chicago was the first time we beat them. But this guy was one of our better players. He might have made a difference had he come back on, but we'll never know that. I was so proud of the team doctor that day because of what he did. He should have been. I think he's been promoted since through the channels. I think he's the British and Irish rugby team doctor now, or if not, he's high up there. But he's a class act. He stood by what he believed in, and it's great to see him doing so well. It's great to see the player he pulled off doing so well these days as well. He's retired since, but he's back commentating and doing very, very well for himself. So we need more team doctors like that, with the courage of their conviction, like your Eva Caneros and your Éanna Falveys. We need more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you about all sorts, about obviously your own personal situation, and disability rights and TBI. Like I said, it's just been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so pleased that you still have this zest for life and wanting to do well and so on and so forth. Just quickly, you kind of mentioned it before. So what are you up to now in regards to, do you do any activism regarding disability, or are you just working? What are you up to these days?
I'm working as a special needs assistant in the special care unit of St Mary's Special School in Navan. I love that. I'm involved as an under-9 coach with my son's Parkville team. But involved, it's sort of it's an awkward word because I can't walk too far on the pitch.
Yeah.
So at the training and at the matches, I'm clinging onto the mesh fences of the Astro pitch cages, and I'm just screaming instructions. I'm screaming encouragement at the young players. I've had a few offers to become involved as an advocate for disabled rights. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. After the launch 2 weeks ago, I was blown away by that. So I've been exhausted ever since. So I'm going to weigh up all the options and hopefully in the next few months, make a few decisions along with my wife and family as to where to go next.
Okay, cool. So in regards to the book, are there any book tour, is there a book tour involved? How are you promoting the book?
Yeah, well, the book launch was I think it was 400 people arrived in the small shop in Navan 2 weeks ago, and there was only 280 books for sale. So a few people went home without a book, but they came in the following morning and got what they wanted. I've just been back from Portlaoise where I sold a few books myself. I'm hoping to go to Limerick now soon and do a book tour down there. I've been on local and national TV promoting my story, and we just the sky's the limit. There's a book festival, Hinterland, in Kells, just up the road in June. I've been asked to speak at that, so it's snowballing now, Chris. So it's exhausting, but it's a good form of exhausting, you know.
Yeah, cool. And where can people buy the book if they're interested in purchasing it?
It's available on Amazon. It's available on Easton's. It's available in all good bookstores online. Just Google and a bang on the ear. My own website has all the links, philquinlan.com. So yeah, we'd love to sell a few more.
Cool. And what I'll do in the description of this video, when this goes up, I'll put a link to your website in the description below so people can have a look and explore there. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. And God bless yourself and God bless the family and all the best for the future.
Thanks a million for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Cool.